we've sort of gone through most of the detailed questions already. And if we had an audience everyone, welcome to this meeting of the Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Stephen Mulliner and I'm the chairman of the committee, and I'm assisted on the desk here by Councillor Joan Hegan, the vice chairman, Mark Mills, our scrutiny officer, and Fiona Cameron, who is looking after the clerking of the meeting. We'll start off with apologies for absence and any substitutes. Fiona.
Thank you, Chairman. We've got apologies from Councillors Blishen and Edmonds, and there are no substitutes this evening.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest?
There's none been received before the meeting.
And does anyone have any interest to declare now? Thank you. The minutes, they have been published. The minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of September. They have been published. Has anyone got any questions?
Thank you. Well, I'm noted as being present. I can see why that was the case, because I didn't apologise because I felt rather ill. But half an hour before the meeting, I was due to set off. So I didn't actually get to the meeting. So if you could remove my name as being present.
So you were saying that your meeting is, you're recorded as absent when you were in fact present?
I'm recorded as being present, but in fact I was absent, but I didn't apologise. That's why it threw everyone. It's a perfectly understandable thing to...
Well, thank you for being honest about it.
You.
I'm sure it'll be amended accordingly. Item 4, questions from members of the public.
No questions from members of the public and no questions from members either under item 5.
Thank you for anticipating the next item. We'll now move on to item 6. So this is, I should add, a special meeting. It's designed to give adequate opportunity to look at two important financial documents, the medium-term financial plan mid-year review and the housing strategy. And we'll start off with item 6, the medium-term financial plan, and either Peter Vickers or Rosie will be presenting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report in front of you is our medium-term financial plan mid-year review. Officers have undertaken to carry out a mid-year review of our general fund position in light of particularly the economic position that we are in as a nation, and the uncertainty that brings with it. Within this report, we have started off looking at originally the outturn position in 21-22, where we had a net underspend of £452,000 after allowing for agreed budget carry forwards. So we ended the year in a positive financial position, enabling us to put that £452,000 into reserves and prepare us for future uncertainty. We have identified the key items that were the material variances and items to note within the report, and considered their impact on the current financial year and the MTFP going forward. We've then looked at the current financial year, and we are currently forecasting a financial outcome.
Sorry, forgive me. Could you actually, just for the benefit of those watching, go through the major items briefly, but just to draw attention to them?
Absolutely. So, excuse me. Yes, absolutely. I've got it. Don't worry. Thank you. Income is a key area that we monitor and look at, being something that we cannot always control at the council. Within the income areas, we identified that building control income fell short on the original budget in last financial year. This seemed to be a COVID-19 period issue, as this year our income is broadly in line with our budgets again, and we're seeing that income is returning to a position of normality. Within environment, we had a positive position on our car park income, performing much better than the approved budget last financial year. That was partially due to the increase in car park fees that was agreed last September, and also we were seeing users return back to our car parks last financial year, and that has continued a little this financial year too. Within the finance area, we struggled to meet our investment property income targets last financial year. There were some properties that were void, and it was a difficult market to let some of these, and we continued to have a £190,000 target in last financial year that has carried forward to this financial year, and we are beginning to see some achievement of that target, but some does stand out at this stage. The planning income fell short of budget in last financial year of £270,000, and we have actually revised the 22-23 budget by £250,000 in the February council meeting. We were identifying that recovery was unlikely in this financial year and going forward, so this shouldn't remain an issue going forward in our budget setting process. And then on top of that, we were carefully managing establishment spend, and we were able to deliver a final saving of £345,000 in last financial year. The other key item to mention in last financial year was the leisure centre management contract, where we were not receiving the budgeted management fee that we would usually receive. The leisure centres had periods of closure, and falls in new customer numbers were impacting the financial security of our leisure centre contract, and so we worked with the contractor throughout the period to support them to ensure that the leisure centres remained open throughout the financial year. And I can add that in this financial year, we have now returned to a management fee income of around £500,000 for the year, and we are receiving that for this financial year. Looking into this financial year and some of the impacts and risks that we are aware of and noting in this report, is the impact of inflation on Waverley's budgets. We were budgeting for inflation in this financial year of between 3% and 4%, and inflation coming through in March was around the 7% range, so we were short on our inflation provision in this financial year. That has been impacting. However, our bottom line position has been recovered somewhat by the increase in interest receipts due to increases in base rate. So although inflation is continuing to impact on both contracts, utilities, etc., we are able at this stage to mitigate the impact of that. We also are raising in this report the impact of the cost of living crisis on Waverley's communities, the businesses and residents in the area. So far, we are not seeing a material financial impact on the council's finances. However, we are supporting them as much as possible through other funds and through our hardship reserves that we had put in place at the beginning of this financial year, and officers are continuing to support residents and businesses in covering their costs, such as the business rates, council tax, and their own personal bills, and supporting them through funds such as the Household Support Fund. In this financial year, our key income areas are generally performing well. We are doing well in treasury investment income and also in car parking. There are some areas that are struggling to hit their original budgets, such as green waste and Careline. However, overall, the position is generally covered. So we are not seeing huge impacts on this financial year at this stage. And then I don't want to take up too much time of this meeting. So we are looking at the external funding. We have achieved additional external funding through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. We now have an officer in position who is seeking additional funding, external funding for the council to deliver projects, support revenue, and he's working hard to make sure that we are in a positive position gaining from those funds.
Could I ask you to just go a bit more detail about the UK Shared Prosperity Fund? What size of fund is it? Which bodies can apply for it? And I mean, what sort of funds can we expect and what can we use them for?
Absolutely. So the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, Waverley has been allocated £1 million from memory. The pot is for infrastructure and support of the levelling up agenda that the government have provided us. And in addition to that 1 million, we have an extra £400,000 rural delivery grant on top of that. So work is undergoing inside the council at the moment to identify and assess the projects that can be spent upon. And that is being supported by this external funding officer at the moment. Also in this is in paragraph talks about the homelessness grant, which we receive a substantial sum in this financial year. And I think it's worth noting that we are foreseeing reductions in this grant going forward. There has been consultation from the government to reduce this, and we are awaiting the outcome of that consultation.
Sorry, the other name which I saw, Wilmer House, could you just comment briefly on that?
Wilmer House, yes, absolutely. So external funds are being sought for Wilmer House to undertake some of the works required on that building. That is through the MEND funding. I don't think we have any outcomes on that at this stage. We are just in the bidding stage.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving forward, the leisure centres. So as I said before, we are now returned to a £500,000 receipt to the council. We are seeing that user levels are not at pre-COVID-19 levels at this stage. We are in tender position at the moment for the new contract to start in July 2023, for which we do not yet have tender returns. So we are awaiting that information. And we'll share at the opportunities that we gain along the route. We are seeing that energy costs are having a large impact on leisure providers and are in contact with our leisure provider to mitigate the impacts of utility cost increases. Within this financial year, employment market has been very competitive. Retaining and recruiting staff has been difficult. We are seeing very high increases in particularly agency costs and temporary staff costs, and managers across the council are working hard to minimise the costs and keep the staffing costs within approved budgets. At this stage, this isn't creating too negative an impact on our overall position. However, it is a risk that is worth flagging at this stage, and regular monitoring is being undertaken to minimise any unknowns coming forward. The other thing we're looking at in this financial year is we've been refreshing our updates on the saving and efficiency programmes that were already in place, reviewing their achievability, the delivering of the savings within those strategies and considering the timing of when those savings or efficiencies will be coming forward. So we have been refreshing all of those for the latest information. For example, on the commercial strategy, we have included, updated the profiling of when the Edge is being expected to be handed back to Surrey County Council. We've included a forecast inflation impact on our fees and charges if applied in the budget setting process coming forward in February. We have updated our business transformation position regarding the rental on the Berries top floor and the difficulty in letting office space at the moment, and also reprofiling some of our assets, incomes in the property and asset management targets. On top of all of these, we've also been identifying some of the known changes coming forward for our MTFP, such as the external audit fees are expected to be uplifted. We are expecting triennial pension review to come through, and Surrey County Council are looking to return some of the services that we deliver on their behalf back to Surrey County Council. So those will have an impact on our MTFP position.
Could you just, you mentioned savings if the Edge is handed back. I mean, what sort of sum we're talking about? 10,000, 100,000?
It is, off the top of my head, I think it's about 45,000 per annum. So it will deliver a 9-month saving in next financial year and the remaining 3 months in 24-25.
Thank you. And what's the impact on us, if any, of Surrey County Council taking back the verge cutting?
The verge cutting, we are expecting to have actually a neutral position. Although we will not be delivering the service, it will impact the efficiency of our grounds maintenance contractor. So we're actually foreseeing that our rates will increase. So we are expecting a net neutral position on that contract being handed back to Surrey County Council at this stage. More work will be undertaken over the next few months before we bring forward the final position in the budget at this stage.
And the external audit fees, 150%, does that mean basically, presumably, does it mean they're going to rise to 2.5 what they are at the moment?
Yes.
They're about sort of 50,000, aren't they? So although it's an increase, it's not actually huge, but it is large by 75,000 more roughly.
So our experience with the audit over the last 2 audit years, particularly last year, was the amount of compliance that Grant Thornton's had to do within its audit. Nothing directly relating to Waverley, but obviously auditing our accounts, they have to apply their processes. They pass that fee on to us, so our base fee is around about £45,000. But our experience in the last couple of years, it's been literally double that anyway, and it depends on where they cut the cloth on that in terms of the charge. So the band we're looking at is anywhere between 112 and £225,000 for an audit, which is quite eye-watering for an authority of this size.
Thank you. And the other thing, now we've had until very recently 20 years of very low interest rates, and the triennial pension review has basically required us, like many employers, to make more and more provision. Now, of course, interest rates have gone up. Would it be right to expect there might actually be, if you like, a sharp improvement in the forward look on our pension fund? Because, of course, you can now expect to get much more annuity income from any investment in gilts, certainly in money going forward.
Well, that's certainly an expectation. I met with the actuaries probably about 2 weeks ago, and the message coming from them was that at best it will be neutral for us. They were predicting an increase on the back funding element, which is the historical lag that we've had on the draw on the pension fund. And they were going to compensate that potentially with the employer's contribution directly from salaries. So the whole package, they're saying potentially will be neutral. We'll have to wait and see what they come up with.
So basically, you're saying the first element by dropping the employer's contribution to take account of the fact that so interest rates are now moving in a direction basically favourable for pension funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking forward in our MTFP, we continue to have a budget gap across the 4 years of 11.9 million. And after the identified measures to mitigate this gap, the overall budget shortfall is 3.4 million over the 4 years. This does include inflation assumptions. So in 23-24, between the 8.6 and 11%, dependent on the contract involved. And then working through the following financial years of 4% down to target rate of 2% inflation. So this in next financial year, we're looking at around an 800k projected shortfall, and options are not considered in this paper. This is really to flag the size of the gap and begin the conversation around what actions the council could take.
And if I'm correct, that is in fact of the same order of magnitude as the next 3 years as well, which takes you up to the cumulative 3.4.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
So just to finish off the content of the report, we've also reviewed our capital programme and look to identify where certain projects can be pulled back or where change in approach has been required. And we have identified £174,000 of saving in this financial year on our capital programme. So this gives some flexibility in this financial year if anything comes up that we have not yet factored into these forecasts. But we will be looking at redoing any feasibility assessments on projects as they come forward in light of the inflationary impacts that we're seeing and the economic impacts. So as these are undertaken, we'll be bringing those forward to members. So just to the part of this report is around the risks, and on top of the risks already identified, we do have some other risks, such as the fact that our non-earmarked reserves have been depleted over the last few years, and we have limited ability now to flex those in line with any upcoming requirements and any one-off adverse impacts, and also adequacy of our reserves as it stands. We have reserves in place to mitigate some of the risks that we foresee. We believe those are sufficient at this stage. However, dependent on external factors, we will need to keep those under review. And finally, the negative government grant is still on the agenda. It seems to be deferred at this stage until the next spending review, but we do not have clarity yet on what financial support, if any, we will receive from central government. We will expect that in the December period, right before we are setting next financial year's budget.
But to be clear, at the moment, we get some retained business rates and we get some new homes bonus, but apart from that, nothing else.
Correct, yes. So we are currently in receipt of about 1.8 million of retained business rates, which goes towards funding our general fund. And the new homes bonus, I can't quite recall, 1.6 million, thank you, which we have received this financial year. We are no longer in receipt of legacy payments, so we don't know what we could be receiving next financial year. It does depend on housing delivery, assuming that the current government continue that grant as it has previously been held.
Thank you very much indeed. It was very, very clear. Members, any questions based on that? Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much. I wonder if we could just turn to page 19 to Annex 1, and I wonder if you could just give us a little more detail on that. Could you just take us through the columns and the approved budget? They're the year-end figures adjusted, are they? And then you've got a forecast forecast variance number particularly, and these are year-end numbers. Could you just give us a little more help on understanding that, please?
Absolutely. So this Annex 1 is our forecast year-end position. So this is our forecast outturn as at the end of September. So it's Q2. So our approved budget is where we have taken our opening budget and applied any approved environments that have taken place. So those are any budget movements that have been agreed either by members or internally through delegations by heads of service. The forecast outturn is what we expect the year-end position to be at this point in time. So at the moment, we are forecasting that we will be in a £41,000 surplus at year-end, and the forecast variance just flags where the movements are there. So you will see one of the largest items there is in the finance area. That net 643,000 is primarily treasury investment income. And we are also seeing, you'll see in the general funding area, in the expenditure line, there is a £463,000 variance forecast, and that is the impact of inflation in this financial year. So we are in the fortunate position so far that we have been able to mitigate the impact of that inflation. However, obviously that will have a compounding effect going forward. So it remains to be seen how that will pan out.
Thank you. So if we were to look, for instance, at the environment total, and environment includes car park income, does it not? We see there that expenditure is at 13,366, and that's you're expecting that to 13,342 with an income of 9.2. You say that the car park income last year was appreciably better than the plan. But what are you expecting the car park income to be this year over what we originally said it was going to be? And how much of that is in this approved budget? Because it gets very confusing as to where things are.
Absolutely, and where it's been compounded all together to give a summary, you miss some of that detail. So that environment income line where we are seeing a 4,000 adverse position actually is we have a 170,000 positive position on car parks within that number. It is being counteracted by other incomes that are struggling to perform in that area. So the current financial year, we are £170,000 ahead of, or we are forecasting to be £170,000 ahead of original car park budget at this stage.
Thank you. And just a slight deviation going on to the CapEx, onto the capital. Could you just give us an update on the M&Co, the old M&Co building in the High Street in Godalming? When do you expect to let the retail unit in the front, and what's the position on housing, and what's the timetable for the development of that property?
So the project's underway at the moment to develop out based on existing planning permission. The consultants and tender specification for the developer to do the work is currently being worked up. The plan is that that will be in place early January before we get to make decisions on the developer. The retail unit side of it will depend on the physical works, because you can't really open a retail unit at the front whilst the building's being remodeled. So that timing will actually come through as part of the project plan once we firm up just what's going to happen in respect of developer on site.
So, sorry, do I understand that therefore that the retail unit is unlikely to be let until after the development has been concluded, or after the approval for the go-ahead?
There's certain logistics at play here. We can't really have a retail unit in the middle of a building site. and it's one unit at the moment. So as part of the planning permission, the building's going to have to be cut at some point along the way, because at the moment it's one huge retail unit. It won't be that going forward. It's only going to be probably a third of the retail space. The rest of it will be developed for housing as per the current planning permission that sits there. So a certain amount of work will have to happen to develop the retail unit into what it's going to be before it can, literally before it can be let. So there's a whole logistics we have to get through with that. And reality is that's probably at least a year away just for the works to happen.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, could I just ask one question on the timetable going forward for the plans beyond this year? We expect to get a settlement from the Department for Levelling Up just before Christmas, I guess. That will be the usual thing. Around about midday on the 24th or something of that sort of December. Could you just take us through a little more of the detail of what you expect, what the jungle drums are saying? When you talk about the negative grant, I mean, that's been around for about 6 or 7 years, at which point it could have been, and every year it doesn't happen. I think there'll be a riot if it ever does happen. And you mentioned the new homes bonus declining over the period of time, and you don't know how much it will decline over time. Are there any other, apart from the inflation impact, any other items of that sort which are highly subject to variation?
So just taking your first question about spending review, we should hear traditionally before Christmas. In terms of what the jungle drums are saying, we haven't got a clue. They're not actually saying anything. This can's been kicked down the road, as you say, for 7 or 8 years. And our understanding is it's been formally being kicked down the road another year. So we don't know is the answer to what's going to come out of it. We certainly know in terms of government impact where there could be impacts. So it's new homes bonus and business rates. Business rates is part of the spending review. That's another year down the road. New homes bonus is immediate. So we don't know what we'll get in terms of new homes bonus until the review comes out. And that's it. In terms of the second question around assumptions on inflation, is that what you're asking? Oh, Rosie.
So in this MTFP, we've applied a range between 8.6 and 11% on inflation. Our contracts are set on a number of different inflation rates and also at different periods. So it's set on a range to try and estimate that. We are expecting inflation to go up a little in the next couple of months before it hopefully begins to return back to a somewhat normal level. The Bank of England expectation is that it will return back to 2% target rate in around 2 years, which is what we've modelled in the MTFP that we've presented today. We are seeing improved Bank of England rates in light of that inflation, so that is one of the external factors. And I think coming back to the new homes bonus, that is dependent on housing delivery in the area as well as the government decision on how they decide to issue their finance settlement. So we will need to look at our housing delivery alongside the government's proposals when they come out.
Councillor Neal.
A general question, please. The imminent budget by the Chancellor, we don't know what the effect of that is going to be, I guess, but do we expect that to have an impact here? And if it did, how quickly would that be reflected into all these figures? And, you know, would in terms of our planning for the going forward from here? Thank you.
So in terms of the imminent budget coming forward, in terms of impact on us, we're not expecting anything other than if it ended up like the last one that they did, which was a budget statement. It had quite a profound impact, and fingers crossed it doesn't happen a second time.
Well, thank you very much. I have one tiny one. I've just noticed that on page 27, there appears to be a budget challenge savings of an increase in garden waste subscribers, bringing in 30,000, but you were in the main report commenting that actually they were reducing at the moment. Does one have to be adjusted?
Yes, so the 30,000 that you're seeing in note D or page 27 is was part of the original opening budget. So we were foreseeing that we would be able to increase garden waste subscribers at the beginning of the financial year. And actually this 30,000 is struggling to be achieved at this stage. We are not seeing the level of garden waste subscribers that we hoped to achieve. So I think where we are not achieving the budget in this financial year, this is part of the budget that is not being achieved at this stage. Obviously, officers are working hard to try and recover that position, but at this stage, we're not seeing the garden waste numbers go up as hoped.
So if that is borne out, then obviously the first column on Annex 3 will have to be adjusted for that in due course.
Yes, correct. We will be reviewing those as part of our budget setting process.
Yes, continuing on the green waste on page 14. Have you talked to other authorities to see if this is a trend across everybody, or is it something particularly affecting Waverley in terms of the service? And I noticed, for example, I know Guildford's subsidised, but it's a lot cheaper if you're in Guildford. And I do hear residents talking and moaning about the fact it's so much cheaper if you're in Guildford. And also looking at other boroughs, we do seem to be quite expensive, and there are commercial alternatives. So I'm just wondering what the underlying thing is. And continuing on a theme there, the same with the care line, numbers going down. But again, when I Google, there's a lot of commercial operators out there who are operating at a much cheaper rate. So is there potentially a review to the point where you say, maybe we're not going to be in this business in the future?
I think that's one that services will need to work through alongside finance. To be honest, I don't know how they are delivering their service and what their plans are for each of these services. We are aware that Waverley does charge more than Guildford, for example, for green waste. And in previous years, we've had growing numbers. This is the first year we've begun to see a reduction. So up until this stage, the market in the area seemed to be able to take the increased prices. This financial year seems to have been the first that we've seen the reductions come through. So perhaps this is something to review.
But if it is cost of living, surely there'd be a similar trend in Guildford and the other boroughs. So has anyone asked?
I'm not aware personally. I will talk to the service, but I'm not sure, I'm afraid.
May I ask another question? It's also been in the news this week about Freedom Leisure having to close in other parts of the county. You're assuring us that things are fine and you've been very supportive of them through. So can you just give assurances that things are all going well here in Waverley?
So we don't work with Freedom, we work with Places. So a different contractor. Absolutely. So at the moment, we're continuing to receive our management fee. They have been in conversation with the service. They are seeing energy costs being difficult to cover themselves, and we will be in conversation with them of how to mitigate that and make sure that our services are open as much as possible. But at this moment, there's no indication.
So picking up on the news, so there's no, I mean, they were talking about having to reduce the heat of the pool. I mean, I'm assuming those sort of things are potentially going to happen in our leisure centres then as well. Is this being talked about?
I'm sure there will be conversations that will be being had over the coming months. I think at this stage it's too early to say. I couldn't give you the detail myself. Those will probably be considerations.
I think the information is that there will be some very active discussions of these factors after the tenders come back at the end of this month and working up to the July 23 new contract date. Clearly, some councils and leisure companies have made some quite difficult decisions to actually close pools. Not something you want to see, but clearly energy costs are going to be a very large factor of that. There are no more questions. Frank, I'm sorry.
Thank you. My questions mainly centre around Annex 3. You mentioned, Rosie, on the external funding, about £1 million from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and another 400,000 under a rural heading. Where do those appear in Annex 3?
Those pots of funding do not appear actually in Annex 3. They are separate projects that will come through for separate approvals. So at this stage, they're not in here, but also they will not impact our revenue budget and the ongoing.
So they're solely for capital
They will be,
usage.
yeah, they'll be one-off project delivery.
Okay, what a shame. So sticking with Annex 3, there's an awful lot of question marks, and you've put in the comments section the potential worst case scenario, but it looks to me as if what's already a scary shortfall of nearly 3 million could realistically be nearer 4 million. Is that the correct interpretation of all of that?
Yes, potentially there will be more negative impacts coming through, and we've tried to indicate how much those could be, but at this stage we don't have enough certainty, which is why we've left them out of the MTFP. But yes, as some of those come through, they will have negative impacts, most likely on the MTFP. We're just waiting for some more certainty.
Okay. We increased our hardship fund by £50,000 this year. How's that being spent? Are we likely to need to increase it further?
Fastest finger. At the moment, we're unlikely to be, there's no evidence to suggest that there's a call on the money to the degree that we will need to be putting additional monies in place next year. We've still got some time to go this financial year to judge whether the cost of living crisis is actually going to bite to the degree that we will have to put more money into this. So it's a watching brief at the moment.
And on a similar note, do we know when we'll get the next tranche of the whatever the government fund that comes via Surrey? The name is escaping me currently.
That's Household Support Fund.
That's the one.
So tranche 3, I believe, is due very shortly, and the service are already in plans of how they're going to be delivering that grant, and that will support a number of our vulnerable residents.
Okay, I know it's not part of this, but it was a chance to ask for it. One of my concerns about seeing information presented simply as variations is that we don't get the opportunity to see the base figures and the large numbers that sit behind them. And comparing it with the work we do, for example, as a town councillor, it's not possible to see any large numbers that we might want to focus on. So I've just got a general question. Are there any areas of current expenditure for historic reasons where there's any element of cross-subsidy by residents as a whole to the residents of a particular part of the borough? And I am thinking particularly, for example, of Farnham Museum. I mean, I'm conscious that Godalming Town Council spends 7% of its annual expenditure supporting Godalming Museum, and yet I believe it's still the case that the total cost of Farnham Museum is borne by Waverley as a whole. And in very straitened times, I think there's possibly a case to look for inequalities before we have to start looking potentially at borough-wide cost expenditures. Is there any sort of comment to be made on that?
So this is a wheel that does go around. luckily not too frequently. We've crossed this bridge a few years ago. A challenge mainly from Hazelmere was made around cross subsidy. It's a very big issue. There are many moving parts around the funding and the calls on that funding across the borough and the ownership. A huge piece of work was done pre my time, actually, when Mr. Clark was still around, and back in early days for him. There was no conclusion that could be drawn from that in any substantive way, because there is more emotion in that. It's more of an emotive issue than it is a factual issue about how monies are carved up between the main centres of population and the rural areas. Such things as car parking incomes is the biggest one, and where that money goes. There are no easy answers to it, and everyone's got a view. So it's quite a big can of worms to open, and I would put caution on that.
Sorry, Councillor Howard.
Another question on page 14 about the implications of the risk to the homelessness grant, and what does that mean on the ground? How, in terms of impact for our residents, and what sort of collaboration are we doing with other homelessness charities, and how could if we're losing the grant, how can we be working with homeless charities working within Waverley?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I may answer that one for Councillor Howard. From what I understand, for the next 2 years, we'll be all right for our homelessness support grant. We've also achieved 3 years of Rough Sleeper Initiative grant. We are also beginning to draft a new homelessness strategy and action plan, which will come via this committee for adoption probably next April, where we will be setting out the strategic implications for a possible reduction in grant. It'll mean a much more acute way of spending the money. And we do have, as you pointed out, Councillor Howard, relationships with other providers. We can purchase bed spaces. What we're seeing is higher need homelessness clients who are homeless, not because they simply can't find anywhere to live, but for all sorts of other reasons. That's where the rough sleeper work is coming in. What the government will do in terms of supporting local authorities to fund homelessness and the prevention of homelessness, we don't know. But the new strategy will take a good look at that, and we'll be setting out the challenges and the way we seek to address them should there be a reduction in government funding.
That's very reassuring. Thank you.
Right. So anyone else with anything to say or ask on this item, or shall we move on to the other item, which is the Housing Revenue Account Business Plan Strategic Review? And may I finish by saying thank you to the officers for their report and answering questions. Mr. Smith. Councillor Nicholson.
One comment before we move on to housing. It's about funding, and I think I've always been a very firm believer in funding on merits. I think what you need is a transparent league table so everyone can look at every project and see which is the best project. We do this at Hazelmere Town Council in a very micro way on our allotments. So it could be that some allotments get more than others, but then of course things move around, and then it's helpful. So I think it's very useful to actually look at that on merit. Thank you. That's a simple comment.
To clarify, you're suggesting there should be a list showing how much every project gets in funding from the borough council, so people will see where it's falling.
Yes, that's right. But it's you'd have a league table based on why the money has to go to the in order and for these projects, so everyone can see. Perhaps if Farnham got more money 1 year, that would be perfectly acceptable because they have a greater need. Another year, then it could be that Godalming has a greater need and Godalming gets more. But if everyone can see this, then I think people would feel happier and feel as though there's not something working against them.
Well, that's something which perhaps the officers could think about whether it's easy to drag that sort of information out and publish it in a short report. Looking expectantly.
I was giving some thoughts, Chairman. We'll give it some thought as to how we'd present that and the messages that would give, because it's not really that straightforward a thing to put on paper.
I did note what you said. Yes, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the last major item, which is item 7, housing revenue strategic review. Andrew.
I'll turn the microphone on. There's always one. It's like you're on mute when you're on Zoom. Sometimes we don't turn the microphone on. So what you have before you is a report. Now we've concluded the review of the housing revenue account, a strategic review. That was triggered by the council meeting in February this year, where there was a recommendation to undertake a strategic review to address the challenges that were clearly facing us in housing and to return to a sustainable financial footing. I have with me a number of officers to help us in our discussions this evening. Our service improvement manager, Annalisa Howson's project manager for the report, Louisa Blundell, our housing development manager, will answer any detailed questions on our schemes. And then we have the finance team as well with us. The challenges that we've had to look at in undertaking this review have been making sure that at the top of our list for our tenants, we maintain health and safety in all our properties, making sure that those homes continue to be affordable. And in our housing strategy that was adopted in April, we set a Waverley rent so that new build homes will be affordable to low income working households. But of course, that has financial implications. When we're building new homes, to make sure that our responsive repair service continues to deliver and improve service to our tenants, the whole decarbonisation programme and our cyclical repairs and how we improve our homes to ensure that our tenants have safe and warm, good quality homes to live in. The review sits under the corporate strategy. The vision outlined in the strategy is that we as a borough will provide housing to buy and to rent for those at all income levels. And the strategic priority is that we provide good quality housing for all income levels and age groups. So when we've been looking at the review, we've been reviewing the HRA, we've been mindful of those overarching principles. But to drill down a little bit for you, and you'll see all this in the report, why did we need a strategic review? We've spoken about inflation and the impact of inflation on services. Of course, housing is no exception. The impact on rent changes. There was a rent reduction for 4 years, which was designed to make the housing benefit bill reduce and to make the tenants pay less rent. The trouble is it threw every housing provider's business plan into the pond. And so we're just recovering from that. When we're looking at inflation now, and the government have said we can increase rents by CPI plus 1%, but that clearly will not work. If you've got inflation running at 11% or whatever, then to increase the rent levels for our tenants in the coming year is certainly going to have an impact on the household support fund that we've set up. Significant rent increases won't work. We have a short-term, what we hope is a short-term economic issue, but we have a 30-year business plan, and the government have been consulting on capping rents, and we're proposing for this year an increase of 4%, and then looking at flattening that over the next 30 years. The service improvement manager, Annalisa Howson's done a lot of work on rents, so if you have any particular questions on that, she'll be happy to answer those for you in a moment. We highlighted 4 themes for the review. Clearly, our housing stock, how we maintain that, how we improve it, how we can afford to do that, to fund it, finance and risks, carbon reduction, that whole carbon reduction agenda is before us, and also how we continue to deliver new homes. We've had a very successful new build programme for the last few years, but the times they are changing and how we fund that and still are able to deliver homes that our people can afford is an enormous challenge. But we've looked at that very, very carefully, and we have, as they say in a very familiar sitcom, a cunning plan, my lord. And so they were the four particular themes of the review. Working through the outcomes of the review is a new 30-year plan where we are resetting those inflation assumptions, an increased sensitivity analysis, more on that as we prepare the budget that will come forward in the coming months, a proposed borrowing model to invest in stock and also to fund our new build programme, and a tighter appraisal scheme to ensure that our new build gives us value for money as well as delivering the homes that our people need. We want to maintain at least £2 million in reserves. We feel that is prudent. A strategy to borrow, as I say, for new homes delivery and stock improvements, and that commitment to carbon neutral homes. Now, I'll stop there. I don't know whether Peter Vickers wants to add any more. He's the principal architect of the report, for which I am particularly grateful. So, Peter, is there anything you want to add before we pass to the chairman?
No, Chairman, I can pass it direct to you. It's adequate.
If you want to pause there, we can see what questions there are. So members, over to you. Egan.
Thank you. I think this is a really informative report. It really drives into the issues. But if I dare say so, Andrew, you gave a very good summary of what the strategy is. That's not written in this report. I don't think this is a strategy as it currently sits. I do think that before it goes to executive, it does need the sort of summary that you more or less in the script that you just gave there. These, issue strategy, it's commentary, it's not a strategy. I don't have any problems with what you just said, but I think in terms of presentation and a document that people can refer to, we're not quite there yet.
Yes, thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you. In the on page 43 in the plans going forward, could you just take us through a little more in terms of the principal repayment, this enormous sum that we borrowed from government? I can see where the principal repayment financing line is, both in the expenditure level and further down. But when will we be clear? When do we finish paying back the enormous sum that the government foisted upon us a few years ago?
Chairman, so the current strategy, we are actually contractually locked into repaying mortgage up until 2032-33 is the last year of repayment. After that, we will be debt free as it stands, unless we enact this and implement this proposal in this report. The original business plan included 5 years of, so it was £192 million and external borrowing. Was it? No, 192 in total, 5 million internal and the rest external. The first 5 years of the plan included no principal repayment, so the debt was structured from year 6 onwards. That enabled the new build programme to happen, and that's at the point in time when the government had a borrowing cap imposed that we could not go beyond the £192 million to fund housing new build or any other borrowing for housing maintenance purposes, which meant we had to live within the principal repayments that were underway. We are no longer in that regime now. We can borrow to build, and we can borrow to fund as appropriate. It's entirely up to this organisation to determine how that would be.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, what is the, as of today or as of the end of this financial year, how much will we owe the government of the original amount they lent us?
It's somewhere around 160 million pounds. I can't remember the precise figure.
And then over the next 10 years, so that's an average of 16 million a year, but the figures that I see in terms of mortgage principal repayment are rather less than that.
Well, in total, what you're seeing is every year the structure of the debt principal repayments were ramping up year on year, so there weren't a uniform amount each year repaying the original mortgage. So you can see in the final year, I think the payment runs up to something like 17 million pounds, which is a significant amount of money for one particular year to handle out of a revenue stream.
Would be quite good if we could have some more detail of that, because actually I was doing some quick sums, and I think the 5 years up to 27-28, the total repayment appears to be about 50 million. And I'm assuming, I mean, does it get much higher than that? If we can only see the final year, which is 15 million, then if you were to multiply that by 5, that will give you 75, so a total of 125, but you've mentioned that 160 is outstanding. So there's another 35 million to be found. So is that actually our higher figures occurring between 27-28 and 32-33?
So, Chairman, looking at the debt schedule, which Rosie's very kindly just called up the click of her fingers. So 22-23, we're due to pay £7,998,000 back. That's at a rate of 2.848 coupon. And in 23-24, we repay £17.307 million. 34, sorry, it'll be time warp here. And then the final year, well, the final 2 years actually drop right down. There's 35-36 is 3.25 million, and the very final repayment is 2041, and that is 3.237 million.
I see. In fact,
We can share the schedule with you if you
yes,
wish.
the table on page 43 doesn't quite tie in with that. It's actually showing no principal repayment after 32-33, but I think you're saying it's actually, there must be something then in 37-38, but it's saying nothing. You're saying this at 40-41 is the final payment?
Chairman, there's the reason for that is because you don't have every year in front of you on Annex 1.
Yeah.
We've actually shown you the first 5 years, and then we've lumped them after that into blocks. So you're not seeing the whole detail as it says. But if you want to see the full debt schedule, then we can circulate that. It's state secret.
I'd like to think I'd be around to see it paid off, but I don't think I'll be a member of the council by then. Right, thank you very much indeed. Questions on this? If not, I'd like to move on to the part that's dealing with what our plans are for house building in the near and medium term. Andrew, do you want to address that?
I think in your
Referring really to Annex 3.
yes. So I could, at this point, Chairman, if I may hand over to Louisa, who can just take us through the details of those current schemes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So Annex 3 sets out a summary of the financial position of the schemes listed in the annex. There are 8 sites scheduled out there. Otford Ridge Site C, we are in contract. We have started on site in August, and there's a 18-month build programme there, and the scheme is progressing well. We are in a pre-contract agreement at Arons Hill. I should say that Otford Ridge Site C is delivering 30 units as a summary. Arons Hill will deliver 4, and we're in a pre-contract agreement with a contractor having tendered for the scheme.
So could you say what the plans are with that? Are we going to press the button on that one?
Well, this is part of this review to seek member approval for for delivery, and we are also preparing more detailed reports and value for money and viability assessments that sit behind this summary for member consideration as well. So subject to those approvals, then yes, we would wish to press the button to proceed with that. Basically, all these schemes listed here, that is the hope and intention that these would be proceeding through to contract and then delivery. Should I carry on down the list? Okay, so so the schemes listed below Arons Hill, Hartsgrove, Parfield, Queensmead and Turnersmead are all based in Chiddingfold. They are sites included in the neighbourhood plan. And we had a contractor on board. We were in a pre-contract agreement with that contractor. Unfortunately, in September, the contractor went into administration. So we are working with our employers agent to identify a new contractor that's also tendered when we tendered the contract last year, and working up and expecting their contract sum analysis this week, so we can assess that and work our way forward with a plan with that site, subject to approvals. That the sites listed there will deliver 26 units across those sites.
I'm sorry, 26, yes. And so if you do press ahead with the new contractor, and when would you expect the delivery? We're talking about 2 years' time, 3 years' time?
No, we would hope to be on site early in the new year, with delivery over 18 months again.
And then average 2-year build out time?
No, that is, we would have built it out in 18 months. And then Riverside Court is conversion of existing staff accommodation and some other space in an existing senior living scheme. So it's just an additional 2 units for rent. And Cashel Lane is an acquisition opportunity, 12 homes, 6 2-beds, 6 1-beds, and we would acquire the freehold and then the units once it's been built out. This scheme is currently going through the planning process. It has been to committee, submitted by the developer, and there are some questions regarding that committee paper. It's due to come back, just clarifications on the commercial element of that site in its history. But my understanding is that the planning officer is supporting that application by the developer. So our intention would be to enter into a acquisition and build with the developer to deliver those 12 units in Godalming.
Thank you. I mean, how much variance on the scheme cost are you anticipating?
Well, my understanding is, and Candice can confirm, that there has been a contingency already built into these figures to consider the build cost inflation impact that there may be on these schemes.
That's what I was unclear. So they are inclusive of an
They are
up-to-date
inclusive
inflation
of
provision.
a potential uplift, yeah.
Could you go into detail about the revenue side? Is this actually aiming to service the debt interest, or actually to repay the capital as well? So when you talk about revenue neutral from year 17, what is that actually seeking to achieve in presumably something like 20 years' time from now?
Yes, that's both the interest on the loan and the capital. So it's the entire cost of the scheme.
Right. I mean, is revenue neutral the right sort of phrase? Because capital repayments don't really form part of the revenue budget.
We would contribute through revenue it would be a contribution through revenue contribution into capital reserve to repay debt. So we do pay our debt repayments through revenue contributions.
So in fact, that is the element which is a genuine revenue charge.
Yes.
Good, thank you. Thank you again for a very informative report. If no one has anything else, then may I say thank you very much to all the officers present for your help. And I'm delighted for once to end a meeting earlier than normal.